So today I'm speaking with Chef Tidwell. He is an American artist and a libertarian, as far as I understand. You have grown up in a conservative household, or at least your father was conservative, and you are now working with peers in the arts who are a bit more to the left. Thank you for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
All right. So in the art business, how is it? How is that actually playing out for you when you deal with your colleagues and some topic comes up about Trump and about the invasion of Arabs in Europe or some other issue that strikes the news of the day?
Well, did you say art?
Oh, I thought you're an artist, aren't you?
Well, I am an artist in a number of ways. I mean, I'm a member of the Screen Actors Guild. I have a background in broadcast journalism. I did some theater, I've done some voice work, plenty of acting, and I also do some digital art. And of course, I have my YouTube channel. But you know, in general, it's like an artful. It's also sort of conceptual art, like the lifestyle art, the art, you know, the art of the deal, the art of war, just living artfully, and that's also part of it as well. When I call myself an artist, some would say that there's an artist archetype. You know, you have your engineer archetype, you have advocates, you have all these different archetypes and stereotypes, and I feel that, you know, I fall under an artist archetype. I get dopamine from entertaining myself and others, so that's a large part of it. But I don't actually work. I don't monetize my art right now at this point in time. So it's not really my industry. I work in financial services, but I do have a background in art, so we can certainly discuss that.
I don't really mingle a lot with these people. All right. But as an artist or as somebody who is inspired, or I don't know how to say that, somebody who lives the art, how do you think about arts in school? I wonder if that makes any sense, if you say that it's something like a talent you're born with or a mindset or something. Does that really make sense for pupils to read literature and painting and stuff? Because it seems that the curriculum seems to be politicized every more by the year, actually. And I think that's even more the case in America than in Europe, but it's also the case here. So how are your feelings about the school trying to create this kind of persona with, you know, with its art classes and literature classes, and if they actually do have a place in school at all?
Well, I do think they have a place in school for sure. Art does have a place in school. I think part of my ethos is that I like people that view themselves as non-creative to understand, to learn that they can be creative as well. So I actually do like to foster creative spirit, artistic spirit in people that, you know, may or may not have a predisposition, a bias in that direction as it is. Some people are, you know, working on painting things and doing art as a kid all the way up. It's something like playing baseball or playing a sport. If you start young, you know, you see some of the great virtuosos, these young prodigies, these kids that can play the drums, they can play instruments, they can do these things. I think we should foster that in a school setting, may it be homeschool or public school. I understand. Yeah, you mentioned like sort of a concern about the politics of it, but I do believe that there is sort of an understanding among the art community that art tends to. I think a lot of artists do lean to the left. I think it does give them, you know, politically, it does give them this sort of postmodern lens. When they have a postmodern lens, a postmodern or disposition, that lends itself well to art, thinking outside the box, thinking that things are, you know, everything's a construct, and you're able to knock on these doors and knock down walls, and just, it's a good way to be. But in terms of,
but is it really? may I interrupt? But I mean, this debate is really old because it's I don't know how old it is, but you have it more in the classroom than in the public sphere, actually. That people think that the postmodernism or the let's interpret everything that's in front of you.
Impressionistic.
Yeah, impressionistic. I'm not sure. I think it's the atmosphere is really. I mean, when I think back of my school days, it was all that you write what the teacher wants to hear. It actually does not become what do you think the text tries to say, or what could it mean, or what does the painting may convey. It becomes something like, let's just the authority of the day decide. And that's the danger that I see that really comes with this kind of approach. I do see a space for arts in the school system, in the way that it could actually teach the tangible skills, like how to move a camera, how to paint, how to do the manual stuff that's involved in it. Because arts, I think, involves all the process from the planning to the finishing of it all. And what these kids have to learn is then really these skills, if they have not the talent already. Isn't that the case? Or what are your thoughts on this?
Well, yeah, I actually, what you're describing in terms of the technical stuff, that's something that I would look at. I actually went to a vocational college called Connecticut School of Broadcasting, and I got a certification in broadcast journalism, and that's a lot of the training that you receive there. You receive, camera training. You receive how to write copy, how to appear on camera, how to organize news. How to write copy that for broadcast and for newspaper, which is sort of more of a minimal format, trying to get as much information in as clear and easily understood. Most, they say like write at a 4th grade level, so nobody left out. You get the widest audience. So I do see what you're talking about in terms of the teachers influencing the artistic direction of the children. Yeah. There is this sort of expert culture. I call institutions a modern religion, and part of that is I call them a modern religion, and part of that is academia, because they are sort of dictating what is actually considered acceptable, what they're considered to be good, as it were. So yeah, you do see people. I do realize this idea of going to art school. Like, actually, I see it. I see what you're talking about in an art school context, because people develop using the same method. If they all use a similar technique, and then your teacher is telling you, well, if you don't follow this technique, you're not doing it properly, or you're not doing it according to form. So I think that can lead people into having very samey or similar, or that's where like actually closed-mindedness comes in. Everything, kind of runs in a circle. So you have, I was talking about how artists are really open-minded, right?
Yeah, but it doesn't look it.
but then when you actually get into this sort of school, this educational setting where you have these teachers and academics and professors telling you, well, this is how it should be done. This is the classical way to do it. The teachers that, promote the child's or the individual's, the young adult's individuality, I think should be lauded for their effort because that's really what art is all about. It's about showing your lens, your portrait of the world, regardless of what, media or field you're working in. Your mark on the world, your picture of the world is, I think, what art is about, and not so much trying to fit in with these techniques.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. And there was a book by Laura Ingraham that was Shut Up and Sing. I don't know if you've heard it, but she wrote that.
I know Laura Ingraham.
Yeah, you know her, right?
Fox News, yeah.
Fox News, right? But just rather lately, she started as a talk show host, and I think she wrote a book that was rather down-putting. Like, she was all annoyed by these artists going in front of a camera just to say the message of the day that is, accepted in these circles anyway. And everybody has heard these messages already, and people listening don't think that these people, have anything in advance when it comes to knowledge or skills or anything really. Should artists lecture to the public? But I feel that art is an expression of yourself, isn't it? So the very basic of it is a form of communication. You have very different means to do this, by pictures, by sculptures, sometimes screenwrites, whatever you do. It is at its very core, it is a form of communication. So how do you think should artists react, and what kind of role should they play in the public?
Well, I think artists have a very important voice. Like you said, they are communications. They're about communications at their core. And I do consider myself an artist, and communications is my background. Like everything I've done has been some form of communication, some form of expression of my opinion or how I view the world. I think that they're very important because they hold up sort of an abstract lens. When you look at, when you talk to somebody like, for example, in the context of politics, you have the immigration situation, the migrant situation in the United States, the southern border, and so on and so forth. The concerns of an ICE agent are concrete. So they have to maintain order at all costs. Otherwise, we don't have laws, we don't have a system. Whereas the artist is looking at everything as a construct, as they have a impressionistic view, an abstract view, and then that can actually, sometimes when you're looking at hard reality, you don't get the full picture. Sometimes there is this value that everything has an opposite. Everything requires a mirror. Otherwise, if you don't see, what's happening, if an artist doesn't hold their mirror up to society, then you're missing out on getting as many perspectives as possible. So I'm very pro-information, and I think that artists, while you're correct, sometimes they're not as informed on things like economics or things outside of their general purview, of their expertise. So they may, provide some of the more, I have to be careful with my words, I want to say naive at times, and I've been naive, and I am naive, about certain things, like anything that I'm not a subject matter expert on. You have to ask yourself, how credible are you?
Everything, right?
A lot of artists, they live a lifestyle. You are, your surroundings in a sense. There's a lot of nurture to how we come up. So I think that, if artists spend a lot of time around communes, and they're spending a lot of time around alternative communities that are not mainstream, they can get a skewed perspective on, they have their own, I think that they should vote in their best interest. I think that they should, believe that whatever they need, whatever they want to believe about reality, because we all have a subjective lens. But reality reflects what their surroundings are. So if they see what they see if they're rural, if they're urban, artists are looking at, projecting their reality onto ours, onto the public square. And, I think they do provide a valuable role, but again, it's not complete. It's part of the bigger picture.
It's part of the conversation, isn't it?
The larger
one part of it, one voice. Yeah, I think, I'm just reminded of Pamela Geller, who says again and again that the reason for her fight is really actually her passion and her love for life and arts. She brings up arts again and again because it is really what makes the Western world Western at its core. You spoke of an order that is at the very basic. Yes, there is what I call the minimal consensus of the social contract. Sorry, genau. Sorry. There are some principles that have to be upheld, and there are some institutions that obviously have to function so that every individual can have the most leeway in becoming creative about his life. You have made a video about Jon Stewart and how the Daily Show had its pinnacle at his heyday. How would you say has this I know how's the arts and particularly the comedy community actually fallen from that? Because I even remember having watched Trevor Noah's beginnings when he was very politically incorrect. He was speaking about African assholes, and it was all edgy, and we all could accept it because the bombs were flying in all directions. You know, everybody was having it. Everybody received some parts of it. So what was the reason that Jon Stewart and others like him fell from grace?
Well, I don't think Jon Stewart has fallen from grace per se. I just think that in terms of the cultural shift, the paradigm shift of entertainment and linguistics in general as well. I mean, just the societal shift we've seen in the past, I want to say 5 years, talking about political correctness. So I did do a video called On Jon Stewart and the Political Divide, because, and you know, my late great dad loved Jon Stewart, and he was a conservative. You know, like you mentioned earlier, my parents are conservative. I consider myself an independent. I do lean libertarian. I do not lean authoritarian. That's really the big question. Libertarian versus authoritarian is kind of the real dichotomy we should be looking at, not so much left and right. But to get back to Jon Stewart, yeah, I think it was, he came up in a time before political correctness. I would say 2014 might have been the watershed year for the modern religion that is social justice and the third and fourth wave intersectional movement. We had third wave feminism for decades, but in 2014, this is when you saw the rise of the social justice warrior and all these things. And they speak in a code. Political correctness is a code. So they have limits, they have ethics, they have a moral code. And that's why I call it a modern religion. They kind of stick to the script.
Yeah.
And certain words are evil words and certain words are good words. There is an impressor and an oppressed, and it's all arbitrarily decided because, I call it modern religion because in reality, we have traditional religion. We have people that believe in God, Allah. There's Judaism, there's Hinduism, there's Islam, there's all these different things out there that people can, they can believe in a higher supreme being, like a higher, stronger energy, something outside of themselves. But then, with modern, some people are devoutly secular. They believe there is no God, there is no, and I consider myself a Richard Feynman agnostic, which means I'm essentially an atheist myself. But I also see that in the absence of God, they need to fill that void. Now, I don't want to get way off topic with Jon Stewart. You were saying?
Yeah, maybe my question was a bit too contrived.
No,
yeah,
I think it speaks to something about the entertainment industry in terms of when you have, certain people don't want you to say certain things. They're being, I call censorship also a modern religion for the same reason, because they're trying to control the dialogue. They're trying to control the Overton window of what's allowed. And when you get into an echo chamber where certain things are good, certain things are evil, it becomes really hard to associate positively with somebody that is putting out negative associations. If they're saying things that are politically incorrect, these people that believe in the social justice warrior, I call them disciples, when they can't hear those things anymore because they've become inundated, they've become conditioned to see negativity when you step outside of the politically correct box. And I think that has become monetized. I think that they can't really, if you're Disney, you can't really put out a film and have it be extremely politically incorrect. It can't be something from 1975, standards.
It's so crazy. I think it's even that you cannot reproduce the 90s movies anymore. I mean, Aladdin, so many references to Arabic cultures, and it all would be contrived as racist if somebody would decide to find a hair in the soup. I mean, they always find something if they're looking for it. And I think
they would trend on Twitter too when it got discovered that there's one element that is outside of the allowed speech. Yeah. The linguistics that are allowed.
But what happened in 2014? Really, in 2014, you mentioned that number because, I mean, it seems to me like it is a gradual change that occurred. But you mentioned that number, and I'm not sure why. I mean, what was in that year? For me, it ramped up dramatically in 2015-16 when there was Charlie Hebdo and Brexit, Trump election, this entire hysteria that, tilted it all. But what was 2014? Do you remember?
Well, yeah, there were a couple of different events. Of course, you mentioned the election of Trump. You have Brexit. You have Bolsonaro in Brazil. You have a number of populists, just a shift towards populism, towards conservatism. We talk about Zoomers. Generation Z is, I think they're, it's about 50-50, but they are skewing more conservative than Generation Y, which was, of course, the millennial generation, which I consider myself a part of at 35 years old. Born in 1984, so I am used to all the censorship. I'm used to all these things. Very prescient book. Very prescient book. So 2014 was also the time of Gamergate. So if you talk about toxic masculinity, if you start to use gamers as a negative label, a negative association, gamers, that's when the whole incel thing started coming out. And shortly after that, you had the rise of Trump. You had, masculinity is back after, the intersectionality. I think it was a slow burn. Like, I think that in the United States, and that's the only context you can really look at social justice, or, you can look in the UK, social justice as, being, collectivism, Marxism, cultural Marxism, social Marxism, however you'd like to describe, identity politics, like the rise of identity politics. I'm not sure if it was something to do with President Obama becoming elected. I feel that it was a good thing that he was elected in terms of the identity politics. It kind of got us over that hump of having a non-white president. Not that I, want to go racist and talk about race, but I feel that it was an important cultural step for us to kind of continue to open the door. A female president would have the same effect, and I think it would be very positive. But I think that at a point, the internet has actually been the key to the entire cultural shift. Things in our world, it's like free will. It's like everything's moving towards certain. Some people believe in determinism, other people don't. I'm not really a determinist. I'm more of a, I believe in free will. Yeah. But, things do move in a direction. Like, everything is conditioning. Everything is, you reap what you sow. Everything has causality to it. And so I think that, we also legalized gay marriage. We had more gay acceptance. And so the thing about activism and egalitarianism and all the modern religion of social justice is that, it's a beautiful thing. It's well-intentioned, but at a certain point, the goals that they've set out to accomplish are accomplished, more or less. Women have equal rights. Women have equal pay. I don't believe in the wage gap. So, once you've accomplished, okay, gay rights, gays are okay now, and then you start to bring up, what they consider to be the oppressor, they bring up to the level that they've designated to be, and this is what I ask the question on my channel. I ask, on my Twitter, I say, what happens when the oppressor starts to become the oppressed? Like, what is the transition from oppressed to oppressor? How do we do this? And they just keep on going with the same, I say it's confirmation bias. They just keep going with the same message. So I think that everything comes to a head, and eventually, you have a breakthrough in 2014 with Gamergate, and then the Trump movement, and just the explosion of intersectional feminism. Came around that time. The explosion of intersectional feminism came around that time, for better or for worse. I think there are some positive elements and some negative elements to it. But, that all came at the same time. And then it became sort of this identitarian movement. The people that were saying, I'm just going to say, obviously white males, whites were seen as the majority in America and also in the UK. They were thus deemed the oppressor. They were oppressive, and men were, seen as oppressive over women. And that's kind of how social justice breaks down society into groups, and then says, well, who's advantaged, who's privileged? Of course.
But is it really an intellectual shift, or is it just that this entire industry has run out of purpose? I mean, you have spoken about the monetization of this religion. I have noticed that we are even much more down the road than you are. I think our churches are involved in this, our entire trade unions, every organization and a different level is involved in this diversity racket. um, and they run out of purpose. At some point, they all combine their forces to fight a phantom. It's just amazing to me that it all started sort of in 2014, and you described this as the advent of Twitter. I personally think. I mean, I find it amazing that we have now some means to communicate, and they are now short of shutting us down ever more aggressively. We have found a means of communication, and this would result in us getting ever more censored because it kicked up such a craze that now everybody is in panic and wants to silence everybody else. It's a strange development, isn't it?
Well, it's the trade of freedom for security. That's what it's about as well. Or that can be what they use as a moral cover when they're trying to, eliminate their competition. These digital cartels, the vertical monopolies of social media and Hollywood and Broadway and all these different systems that we've. Oh, institutions. Yeah, all right. I call them a modern religion. I include media under that as well, because you also have, your news media. And, now it's all becoming combined. Like, you can't watch late night TV now without hearing a bunch of political news. But of course, it's the narrative that they put forward, like Russia, 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 for instance, or any of these other, like we talk about Jon Stewart and talk about what The Daily Show has become. If you watch The Daily Show, Klepper, Samantha Bee, Weekend Update on Saturday Night Live, you get all like the same comedy again and again and again. You get, Orange Man Bad. And you don't see anything that really puts the iron to the Democrat side. I mean, you see a little bit here and there. You'll see a punch at like Clinton, but everybody kind of dislikes Clinton at this point, yes. Except for her devoted cult's base, the cult of Clinton, they call it. Actually, Clinton is in the cult of Clinton. Yeah, like I don't know. I don't want to judge people's political preferences, but everyone knew that Clinton was one of the weakest candidates. And now they're trending on Twitter today because of the Jeffrey Epstein suicide. Purported Jeffrey Epstein, yeah.
I didn't really follow that.
Or purported. We haven't seen any footage of the camera of the cell. But yeah, you have all these people that are telling the same joke again and again. Comedy Central, it's all about, anti-Trump humor. And it does affect them monetarily, because Trump supporters that don't have like a really good sense of humor, might not want to hear the same joke about the person they like. You don't want to hear negative associations about your positive thing all the time. I don't think that echo chambers are good. I think that they should be a vacation home and not a permanent home. You should have someplace to go back to that is like more open-ended, and you should be able to ideally watch something that you disagree with.
But you should at some point that these comedians also made this deliberate decision to just drop half the country and go for they have the same audience. And I wonder, you have spoken about echo chambers, and you spoke about confirmation bias and the cognitive dissonance that people don't like, and try to fix that and come to terms again. Isn't it easier for these people who just happened to have their studios in New York or LA to just go with that surroundings because of group pressure rather than of their confirmation bias? What percentage would you say is what?
Well, if you're talking about like the bubble, like the Washington bubble, the New York bubble, the LA bubble, the Chicago bubble, whatever bubble it might be, and also, of course, on the more right-wing Trump side, you have the Texas bubble, and you have Florida. I think Florida is a red state, and I think Trump will win Florida in 2020. So I think that it's not so much, I'm not sure, I don't think we can mind read the actual artists and the actual producers of this content. I don't believe we can mind read the entertainers. I don't know if they're doing it for peer pressure purposes, or if they have principled beliefs that follow, that lead into their art having those politics. Like I said, there is a leftist bias in art and in expression, because like I would say that you can get, art is sort of the fight between chaos and order. It's sort of creation and destruction. So keeping an open mind and not worrying about being too, it's strange. this is actually why
Not
art
being
is
born
not
to be
this
edgy.
this is they're afraid to be if they're afraid to be edgy, exactly. If they're afraid to be edgy, they're actually, some of the artists are losing their vigor. They're losing, people that are too scared of being politically incorrect are not as funny. Like
No.
dark humor,
And
this
it's
is what's
boring.
happening.
I mean,
Imagine if George Carlin or Richard Pryor or Lenny Bruce came out today. They would be, George Carlin would be ostracized, like
yeah.
by the left, by the social justice movement,
You know what?
because they can't accept anything that's that's wrong thing. That even if it's a joke, they see
Yeah.
it as a dog whistle. They see it as, and
it
that
goes
might be me projecting my dog whistle, my confirmation bias. But they don't. They're playing it safe, and yeah, they are, like you say, catering to a specific audience that's guaranteed. Like they know you're captive. They know you'll see the Marvel movie. They know you're going to go see Star Wars. They know you're going to see these things. You're going to watch Star Trek. You're going to watch this. So they'll put their ideology, their intersectionality and social justice into it, and say, well, this is what the audience wants. Like they want to hear, oh, they want to see a male. Since the social justice is anti-male, essentially, because they are oppressive under their narrative, they don't want to. They want to put that in there, and that's how you get your dopamine. Like you have your confirmation that men bad, so you watch a film where I hate to use the term, but I'll use it because people understand what this means. Mary Sue character that there are such things as strong female characters, but when it feels like they're artificially like making a woman more masculine, and you're like, well,
yeah, cringy.
yeah, and I think even women would agree with me on this. Not all women and not all men would agree, but I think that they are catering to a specific audience, and it's all in the numbers. It's like follow the money with this stuff. If it doesn't do well at the box office, in 5 years, as the paradigm shifts, they'll go in a more politically incorrect direction.
Yeah. Then there's a word that always comes up again and again when people dare to hint something, and that is every art could be a potential dog whistle. Is that even possible that a society could react to some dog whistles and insinuations? I mean, could you really build up a following, having your staunch ideology and march for your purpose, if you just dog whistle a bit? I mean, is that fear that these people have and that really restricts the artists from expressing themselves, is that even realistic? I mean, why are they so afraid? On the other, I mean, you have said something like people are afraid and they trade freedom for safety. I think that's a Benjamin Franklin quote. But
That's right.
Isn't speech in a way the safest freedom that we have? I mean, does it really have that bad an effect that people ascribe to it?
Well, I don't believe in. I forget. There's a term for somebody that can incite people through dog whistles. It's like stochastic terrorism, like a person that can give dog whistles and give symbols and say things that incite negative emotions and anger and hate and fear in people, and then they go and act. They don't have individual agency. They're just drones that operate on code. So this, I think, the way that our reality works is that we have our confirmation of the way things are. So if somebody gets, radicalized into an ideology, like if they start to view reality, they have, on one hand, they have their lens, their pure lens, like their own, sort of empirical evidence, their experience. But then they also have this ideology that's that grows to be almost half their worldview. They start looking at people through these lenses, these filters. And I think that I think in this world, I talked about authority and liberty being a dichotomy. I also believe in individuals and collectives being a dichotomy. And I think that some people that are left-leaning largely, but also identitarians on the right, they view things as groups. They don't view them as individuals. And what happens is, to easily identify a group, you need to put a label on it. They organize society by association, by guilt by association, guilt by conversation. They try to ensure that if you're in this group, you are complicit with their direction. It's kind of dehumanizing. but it also kind of presents this sort of hive mind feeling where they have an ideology. I say religion for an important reason, modern religion, because they do think in code. They do think in symbols. So they'll find a dog whistle. They have a specific thing, and I think 4chan did a great job in rebranding the OK hand gesture. I can't even do that in the video without YouTube getting mad, probably. But they find this gesture and they say, well, this can only mean one thing. Now I say that clown world is between postmodernism and absolutism. When you start saying that everything is a construct, but then we can label you and you can't, there's no gray area. You are the label, you are the group you're a part of. They remove the individuality. That's where you find clown world, because you can find people going, well, the OK hand gesture can mean white supremacy, but it's also one of the most easy to do gestures that everybody has ever done.
Yeah, in different
cultures. It's like giving the peace symbol, right? It's like giving the peace symbol. So is it really moral? Moral meaning do no harm. It's immoral to do harm. Is it more moral or more immoral to make a universally used hand gesture associated with evil and negativity? I say that's not good for society. And they continue to do this. They use labels. So I have on my Twitter profile, I say, create your own label, create your own brand. Because if you don't create your own label, somebody else is going to do it for you. They're going to put an adjective in front of your name or your whatever you're doing and say, well, this is, it's how they say with President Trump. They just put, President Trump actually uses this exact labeling system. He uses nicknames. Oh, Sleepy Joe.
Yeah.
And
the other side was just as successful. Yeah.
Pocahontas, and immediately you go to, oh, she faked being Native American. But people also do this in the media. They do this against Trump as well. They'll say, oh, those were racist tweets, even though race wasn't mentioned. They'll just put a word on there, and that's a label. And once it's labeled, that's the association. So if you say defend President Trump in his tweets, they'll say, well, you're defending racism. And that's how they work. They just get you into this big, wide box, and everything outside that box, everything outside that Overton window is wrong think, and it's extreme. And I think that that's driving a lot of the mentality. I think that the collectivism, the collective mentality, stick together, strength in numbers, and you are the group you're a part of. I think that does start to seep in, and it starts to reflect in almost everything you do.
Yeah, and that's why I actually started with this conversation about schools, because I feel people are trained or conditioned to kind of make too many associations. I mean, at the moment, it's this craze about Nazis, everything. That's just too much. I mean, it completely dilutes the original meaning of the words, of the meaning, what you actually wanted to say. And also, it leads to a lot of misunderstandings. And you said, well, a lot of symbols like this is universal. I don't see myself. I also have a problem with this intersectionality being internationalized, because I cannot say the N-word. I mean, there are no cotton farms in Germany. There had never been an enslavement of black people in Germany, and so on. And it's really, for me, not understandable how I shall walk on eggshells for people that my ancestors have not oppressed. And I think that's basically the case for everybody. We are kind of conditioned to think in American terms only, and have to abide to a very strange and ever-shifting rule of a set of rules that makes no sense for everybody who lives outside that place. That's a very weird concept, isn't it? In one video, you spoke about national biases. I mean, you just started with the groups and how we maybe just mingle with people who are just like us quite naturally, and that this in itself isn't worthy of contempt.
Not at all. No.
Not at all, isn't it?
Not at all.
I just wonder, how left-wingers, when they imagine they walk into a sports game and they see two teams and they don't know nothing about these teams. How do they decide who to join? I mean, at some point you go by something, and it's just a random characteristic. It may be the looks, or you recognize maybe your accent or whatever. You just catch something and then you decide, then you decide it's that group, and I just stick with that team. It's not an important enough issue that I really make my mind up about fairness and so on. I just stick with that team. I run with that characteristics. Is that such a big deal?
Well, how do people choose which groups they wish to be a part of? I do talk about this. I have a few videos. One of them is provocatively titled "Generating Racism." Do not generate racism on my behalf. That's not the point. It's ironically titled. I would recommend watching that if you haven't seen that. And I talk about how everybody is racist, everybody is otherist, everybody is sexist, and that's not about a little bit, not in a malevolent way per se, but just in a terms of like, okay, say for example, I'm male, or if I were female, of course I'd have in-group preference, a little. I would understand the plight of a male or a female if I were a male or a female. So I feel like, when people talk about like, oh, you spend too much time with this culture or that culture, we do gravitate towards things, like I said, it's like a mirror. We do gravitate towards things that are like us because they're familiar. And in our lives, we need a good balance of familiarity and new and novel. And so I think that it's hard. I do recommend people stay out of their echo chambers as much as possible and like try to branch out and have an open mind and try to find some things in the outgroup that you like. And that can be any outgroup. That can be, it doesn't have to be about immutable characteristics like race or gender, sex. It can be any kind of outgroup. Like if you have a negative association with gamers because of Gamergate, maybe you should spend more time with gamers and get used to them and humanize them. Bring humanity, not because they're not human, but because you perceived them as being somewhat, inhuman because of the negative associations, from the media, from the conditioning. You listen to your rhetoric if you're on the left, and not the whole left, like the intersectional left, not the, not your Noam Chomsky anarcho-communist type of left, not your democratic socialist left. I'm talking specifically about the social justice movement. If you have a negative position on white males or any kind of male or any kind of female, if you have a problem with trans people, for example, I recommend hanging out with more trans people because you'll realize how great they are, how wonderful they are. And the more you separate yourself, the more you stay in an echo chamber away from these new things, away from these different people and things, the more animosity you get. I do talk about that as well. But there, this idea that, because somebody has, 90%, if they're black and they have 90% black friends, are they racist against other races? No. They just, that is a product of their environment. That's a product of their person. That is a product of their culture. And if you want to branch out, that's virtuous, but I don't think people should be held to this standard that, they associate with the right things or else they're somehow a bigot. I think that we've gotten, like you say, we've gotten into this mentality where it's called otherism. When people are not like you and you hold negative feelings and resentment towards them, that's not a good thing. And I think that in the search for moral virtue and universal truth, the disciples of the modern religion of social justice do develop these negative associations and start not eliminating the hate that they wish to eliminate, but also just redirecting it. And that's why I don't really care for this collectivist stuff. Because you always have to have a hero and a villain, unless you start to get rid of the ideology and just look at it like humanism, like we're human beings, we're all equal. And yeah, some of us are lucky to have, higher IQs or to have better physical strength, better mental strength, better emotional strength. Some of us are privileged. Some of us were lucky. Some of us were born in the least privileged area in the world and ended up becoming, millionaires, billionaires. That's why I believe in free will. I don't believe that we should be locked in to, what the groups we're a part of or our family or our job. I think that we should always have that artist's lens that, we can paint the picture we want to see,
Yeah. I don't really think that in a country that is far too collectivist, and I speak a lot about this on my channel. I think that the conversation between, or the dichotomy between collectivism and individualism, or there's a lot of noise, is a bit overrated. It's a bit exaggerated. I think you need some sort of collective to always protect the individual and his right, and also his right to associate them with different groups. What I find interesting, I think we made a video about it, is that I can't really wrap my head around self-hatred, or that racism against one's own group. At the moment, you have a lot of white people virtue signaling, and the question really is, I mean, is it real for many of these people? Is it real, or are they monetizing it, or is that just to impress their friends? But some of it, and I think of the BDS movement against Israel, there are a lot of Jews involved in this. I wonder how people come to hate their own group. You pick your group, or you are born in one, and what is then this psychological or cultural momentum that makes you think your group itself should be hated, or that you believe everything that's leveled against your group?
Well, I think that go on.
No, my suggestion would be maybe it's an overdose of gullibility. I mean, there's this hate against Israel that's just so strong that so many Jews may live in other areas and just join in, and maybe this narrative is so loud. This anti-white narrative is just so loud that people who are feeble minds just kind of join in the choir and sing along.
Well, they're looking for purpose. They're looking for something to blame. When things aren't going well, people always look for something to blame. And they need to have a scapegoat. They need to have something to point to, because they want to feel helpful. They do want to, give back. I think that a lot of this is the product of privilege. Like, if you have a lot of privilege, if you have a lot of money or power, and then you're also being, from the point you're into high school, public school, if you're into college, and the professors are teaching you a specific ideology, specific narrative, you're entering adulthood for the first time. You've never really paid attention to politics before. You've never really paid attention to the socioeconomic picture before. And then all of a sudden they're like, okay, you can vote at 18 in the United States, and you're an adult now. And you need to, especially now in our hyper-politicized culture, in the United States especially, you need to step up and be an adult, and now is your time. So they jump right in. The first thing they jump in with is what they know, which is what they learned in the academy. They learned from their professors, and of course, what is popular in the media. What is the consensus? And if they stay in an echo chamber where they're not listening to the right, or if they're on the right and they're not listening to the left, they're only going to get that message reinforced, and their confirmation bias will become fortified. They'll develop cognitive dissonance, because when they hear the opposite opinion that they stayed away from for 5 or 10 years as they came into their adulthood, when they hear that, it's be harder and harder for them to accept it into the canon. So I do feel that there is this doubling down effect in collectivism. People are, I think especially in the millennial generation, the safe space generation, people that came from privilege. They came from an era where you could turn on the TV and you had 200 channels. You could pick up a video game and play all night. And it became this sort of culture of people that, lived at home and they always had their parents. They had helicopter parents. I mean, these are all tropes, but at the same time, you see it a lot. Like they want to censor the people they lived in moralistic households. They were always sheltered. And then they want to project that. Now that they're adults, they want to also protect people. They want to be helpful. And so they project their ideology onto things in an altruistic manner. But they also go and say, well, that means you can't say this anymore. For the greater good, you can't say those words anymore. And that's why they start talking in code. And over time, you start to see certain tropes like the pronouns in the profile on Twitter, which I do, I see what they're doing. They're trying to put forth an acceptance and a welcoming to trans individuals and non-binary individuals, which is a very good thing to do. But at the same time, when you start to see that there are certain, characteristics that they take on, and then of course when they're in positions of power, they think it's a good thing, and it may be, but they want to also project that onto everybody else because they feel like, well, we're doing something good. And that's the thing. It's harder to stop somebody that thinks they're doing something good because they have no impetus, they have no incentive to dial it back. They think that would be immoral. And it's, as an agnostic on these modern religions, I think they may or may not be right.
I have a strong feeling they are wrong, and also I see some nefarious forces somewhat behind this. But what I wonder is really, I mean, they are not the best critical thinkers to begin with. If you join that cult,
they think in ethos. They don't think in logos. Now, those are the philosophy terms. Logos being logic, ethos being ethic. Ethos is focusing on the person rather than the argument or the reason. Of course, logic, logos being focusing on the science, the hard reality, the reason, the rational. So they will focus on the individual, and that is breaking down the dialogue a bit. When they say, well, this person is a misogynist, or this woman is a sexist, or they'll use the race card. They'll say this person's a racist. Now, when someone is accused of being one of those things, I know it's getting to the point where like these terms barely have any meaning anymore because they're the boy who cried wolf.
They still have here.
They have some meaning, and that's important because they need to be credible. They need to remain credible because these things are evil things. They're bad things. But they use them and use them, but they'll call you, say, for example, a sexist. They'll call a woman a sexist. And then nobody wants to defend her because they'll be associated with her. They don't want to be associated with a sexist. And a lot of people, like I would say, I don't want to give a number to it, but we'll give a number, 40% of people, 30% probably tune out that person as soon as they hear the negative association. So these people that are collectivists, they're focusing on individuals over arguments. They're focusing on, oh, this person happens to be this religion, this occupation, this sex, this gender, this race. I'll listen more, like you say, like which team do I choose? I'll listen more depending on my preference. I don't really, I don't even need to listen to them if somebody says they're a misogynist, because why would I want to be associated? What if someone finds out that I watched it? What if someone finds out I talked to them? What are they like? That's the kind of world standard they're creating with their animosity towards whatever they label to be Satan, essentially.
Yeah, I think a lot of it has to do with narcissism, isn't it? That we have become a people who are obsessed about the opinion of our friends and who want to judge every life situation as to kind of fit in the group. And if they decide another person is evil, then you also have to kind of find an excuse why you condemn this person. And this is a dynamic that is probably nurtured in cultures that are more collectivist than in America. But now it's coming to you. I just think that we here are a bit ahead of the curve, and we have this the situation. I always feel I'm sitting in the classroom and the teacher is asking an easy question like, what is 2 + 3? And nobody shows up, and then he's asking this kid, and it says 7, and it says maybe, maybe, and he asks the next kid, and no kid will contradict the other kid, and nobody really dares to speak up, and he has to ask the kids, and unless the authority asks the kids to give an answer, it will not respond. And if it's right or wrong does not matter anymore. The logos is gone. So it's all replaced by collectivism or authoritarianism, and that seems to come with one another. Yeah.
And it's all for good. It's all for safety. They want to organize a society that way. They want to organize it by association, and it's not like it's a novel concept. It's just that they've taken it to this extreme where they're starting to call anybody that isn't a Clinton supporter as a deplorable, was one example. And it seems sort of horrible back then to define so many people that just happen to be, minor differences politically. Republicans and Democrats, some truly minor differences when you get down to the nitty-gritty of lawmaking. But they would go, half the country is deplorable. And so that is now extended in the extreme circles to, anybody that disagrees with me is a bigot. I actually have a video, everyone who disagrees with me is a bigot. And that is, it's dangerous. And it's not intellectual. I mean, if they're running around saying, well, we're fact-based, we're science-based, we're the science party, we're the science side. You're just, and I'm not a Christian, but it would be like, oh, you're a Christian, you believe in God, you don't believe in logos, you believe in this moralism, this traditional religion. And then they turn around and they just end up doing the exact same thing, but they don't have God. They just have their, equality or equity. Yeah, they have their modern religion.
Yes, and I feel it's kind of they've taken Christianity and just stripped everything that's good about it away, and then they have Christianity as a comparison, and always harken back to some events in the far past and say, look, you also were guilty of this, but this is not an excuse why you're doing the same thing right now. I mean, it does not make much sense, but they are working this way. Yeah. How much of this is authentic? I mean, how much of these people do actually believe this entire stuff, this deplorable stuff? Hillary Clinton knew Trump before the election campaign. She absolutely, she was, I think, at his wedding. She knows that half of his family is Jewish, and yet she kind of claimed he is an anti-Semite and a Nazi and the next Hitler, and she knew that's completely wrong. But how many of these media types and so on do also know it's wrong to, accuse somebody of a false crime and who is just going along, who's just, multiplying this?
And then we have this thing called libel and slander and defamation. But these, in the internet age, the information age, these terms are becoming, it's becoming really difficult because people are, I consider politics to be a post-truth realm. So what that means, of course, is that anything goes. You can say anything and hope, you can be directionally accurate. And people will just go along with it. Like they'll take their interpretation and run with it. If somebody does something bad, a collectivist that believes in intersectionality will look at the groups that person's a part of and determine from there. So I don't want to, I'll just bring up one statistic. Like over 50% of the mass shootings in America in 2019 are performed by non-white individuals. Over 50%, probably way more than over 50%. Now that, I don't want to bring up that, I don't like to bring up race. I really don't. I think that we're, I think it can hold us back. But when you have people that are identitarians, when you have people that are running around framing everything in the lens of race, they're looking at it as race. In a post-truth world, you want to at least match the other side. You don't want to let them just run away with that and let let them get away with hypocrisy. If they're pointing out racism on the other side, and then all they talk about is race, you have to point that out because it is harmful to frame everything as race. And these people, they will go ahead and, the whole deplorable thing, it's like anything goes. If you call us all socialists and that has a negative association, we'll call you deplorables. It's like it's all just linguistics. It's just as linguistic sparring. It's not really, I think a lot of the entertainers and people that actually read scripts for a living on TV, I think that they're in on it, of course. I think a lot of people are in on it and they realize that it is a game. Politics is a game. And, you whatever the other side does is fair game. So if they're mislabeling people, if they're running around and doing their thing, the other side is then incentivized to go, well, if you're doing it, I'm doing it. And you can't call hypocrisy on me, because hypocrisy is a fool's errand when you're dealing with politics. It just is. So there is, I'm not sure how, I don't want to mind read people and project how cognizant I think they are that it's a game or that it's all just a power play between different political sides. It's all about follow the money. I'm not sure how many people know that, but I think that if someone has like Obama derangement syndrome or Trump derangement syndrome, and it's very clear that, like, I've actually talked to friends and I asked them bluntly, I asked them privately, and I'm not going to share the conversation, but I'll say this, that I asked them, like, straight up, like, do you believe in these really crazy things? Like, do you believe that the president is Hitler? Do you believe that Obama is, a Kenyan Lenin figure? Do you believe all these things? And they will, they'll say, yeah, I do believe it. I say, look, you don't have to go ahead. You don't have to keep the facade up. You can be honest with me.
And they
Do you believe that the president is a Hitlerian figure, a dictator? Yes. I've gotten that answer before. And I said, okay, man, I mean, I'm not going to push the issue any further than that. I gave you 2 prompts. I asked for consent to find out. And those people, I don't know if I can't tell. I mean, I'm going by empirical evidence. If they are not, when I snap my fingers, if they're not coming out of their hallucination, of their trance, then I can only go with that. And I say, well, I hope you're being intellectually honest. And if you're not being intellectually honest about your feelings here, well, you just look crazy. And there's not really, that's the end game, and I love you, but it's harder for the dialogue to happen because they live in a fucking, a dream world. Pardon my French. They live in a. One of my videos talks about gaslighting and people that tell themselves. It's actually a video called "A Pro Tip on Lying," which is another provocatively titled one, and I just talk about how people project in their own head. They tell themselves this story. They tell themselves what the truth is, and that is like one of the most base forms of persuasion and hypnosis, convincing yourself of the lie, of the story. And then they project, what happens is they get that in their head, and then they project that, and then other people that have the same lie, if it's a very popular narrative like Russiagate, people that have the same lie then develop this slow xenophobia towards Russians. And of course, the deplorables, and then anybody else. Anybody that's white that stands up for themselves is a white supremacist. That becomes another talking point of theirs. Everything becomes framed. That's why I brought up that over half are African American, because they say that white supremacy is an epidemic, and it isn't. It's a virus. Is it an epidemic? I think that I haven't seen one in my personal life. I haven't talked to many. I've never met somebody that just tells me straight up, I think white people are better than other people. And I've met people that I've considered like, okay, you're kind of racist, but they still don't say anything about people being better. And it's so rare. I can't even remember, but they act like it's on every doorstep.
Yeah, it's an epidemic. It's everywhere. Yeah.
Yeah. And if people, like I say, about half of them are looking at, they have their nature and they have their nurture, but our entire reality is essentially assigned, our opinions are assigned by the media. So if the media is saying, well, 90% of the problems are white people, or 90% of the problems are women, or if 90% of the problems are any group, they will go ahead, people that trust the prophets of the modern religion of institutions, state, media, and academia, if they trust them, and they trust the subject matter experts, and they put aside their reason, like we say logos, and they go in with faith, which is pathos and ethos, this moral code. When they go in with that, things do start to break down. And that's why you see chaotic situations form as the paradigm shifts, socially and politically.
Yeah, self-hypnotization. I think that's really is a good description. I've never thought about it, but yeah, apparently people are able to delude themselves so badly that the media is more relevant than what they see with their own eyes and what they hear with their own ears. I find that fascinating because you only have to step out of the door, and sometimes you see all these women in burqas in Berlin, and and you wonder, oh, they went out there 3 years ago. How is that is suddenly is a thing, right? I mean, how do I see burqas now suddenly? they kind of don't need to match that. I don't know how they go along with this.
And
apparently,
there is a peer pressure. Sorry to interrupt.
yeah,
There is a peer pressure to all of this. When you start again, when people have this news narrative that they're following, I call it at times like a micro simulation or a macro simulation. That's like what the media narrative is, what they want us to think. So say, for example, everybody believes this one thing. We'll use a neutral example. We'll say, well, I think that all frogs are pink. Now, if the media is telling you that all frogs are pink, but then some people are looking at empirical evidence and going, well, they're not pink. But it's becoming so widespread, this statement that frogs are pink, all frogs are pink, that about 60 to 75% of the public starts to believe that narrative. Now, what happens when you go against that narrative? And what if someone comes in your life and says, well, frogs aren't pink? Well, but the media, but ABC, CBS, CNN, Fox News, they told me so. They said that frogs are pink. And your friend says, no, they're green. Who is the person going to think is more credible? The news that is supposed to be delivering the truth, fact-based truth, or their friend that everybody's being told, well, you have to be an academic, you have to be an expert to speak. I call that
it's all about
self-censorship. It's part of the phases
the moral
of censorship.
Of the day. Yeah.
But you get put into an out group as soon as you disagree with that main narrative. Like you immediately get sectioned away as like someone that doesn't believe the truth. Oh, you're a conspiracy theorist. You believe that frogs are green. Okay. That's what happens. They put a label on you, and it shuts down your critical. Yeah, it shuts down your critical thinking.
Yeah. All right. Thank you very much, and that was it for today.